This is a conversation with Kyla Scanlon, a writer, blogger, podcaster, and content creator with a wide background in the financial world, a passionate level of curiosity, and a love of learning that comes through in the content she creates. This podcast is sponsored by me. Go to joshcherryplays.com to see what I'm up to. Please enjoy this conversation with Kyla Scanlon. Hi, Kyla. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
So let's just start with the background homework. Let's talk about, who is Kyla and what do you do and what got you interested in what you do?
Yes. Okay. So that's a good question. Who is Kyla has changed a lot over the past year. So I graduated in 2019 and I went to work for Cap Group, which is an asset management firm. And then I left them and then worked in tech for a little bit and started making content on the side. And now I've sort of become a financial content creator. So that's what I am right now. That's what I do right now. So I make stuff around the macro economy. I make stuff around the stock market, make stuff around crypto. And I've been educating online since I was 18. So I used to have a blog around options trading. So this was just a natural foray into something else. But yeah, that's it just all of a sudden kind of started, the ball started rolling down the hill, which has been really fun.
Yeah, you've been doing this for a while. Start with what's some of the stuff at the beginning? What made you want to do this? What got you into finance?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm from Kentucky, and it was kind of always oh, what is money? What does that actually mean? And I started trading options in high school, and I didn't know anybody else who was really trading options. My dad was kind of into the stock market, so knew him and knew he was doing that. But I figured I'd go online and find more people who also like the stock market. Went to school thinking that I'd major in engineering, and then realized that finance was a major, and have always just been really fascinated by the idea of money. It's actually kind of unfortunate. I'm more of a researcher than an investor. I still invest, but yeah, I'm an educator at heart, I think, with this kind of stuff. So it's just always how do we get more people involved in the stock market? How do we reduce the gates that are up that some of the institutions have put in place, and just get more people involved in this big, essentially money-making machine, right? Mm-hmm.
I was gonna wait longer to ask this question, but in the spirit of what the question is, it probably makes perfect sense. I was really interested to have you come on because our content is very, very different,
Mm-hmm.
but I believe that our personalities are fairly similar in a bunch of ways.
I'd agree.
in that I think that we may be two of the more open personality types in the finance content creation world. And your ability to jump from subject to subject is really great. And it's interesting that we seem to have tapped into it in different ways. So you've tapped into it with your style, which you have learned to embrace subject change in fascinating ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I've tapped into it by letting myself subject change over and over again on paper until I have the thing that I want. My content is pretty written out. So I'm just curious, how are you? I mean, I think you're probably interested in personality types, and I'm curious, how has personality and tapping into it affected your way of creating and doing what you do?
Yeah, it's sort of funny. My friends that know me really well, they're you're making videos, because I'm an introvert, and
Yep.
it's it's not the most comfortable thing for me to put myself out there. And I do goofy stuff, right? So I do skits where I'm I had a Bold filter on pretending to be Brian Armstrong. It's just it's really interesting. And I think for me, I was always a little weird. Everybody's a little weird growing up, but I think that the content has not only given me a place to help people learn and help them learn in a really accessible and hopefully fun way, but it's also given me a place to express myself in a way that I never thought I would need to express myself. But it's been so gratifying to do it and to kind of lean into this weird part of my personality that I didn't even know existed.
Yeah, and I've found the expression element to be critical as well, and it seems to accelerate my creation.
Mhm.
Where if I can tap into something that's like, oh yeah, this is me just saying the thing that I want to say, I can get way more out that way.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, you're not like muting yourself or like holding yourself back. I think that's been interesting too. It's like these, and so at first I was like, oh, I'm going to remain really neutral. Like I don't give investment advice. Like that's one thing I don't do. But I've let my opinion on like regulation and what the Fed is doing with rates kind of seep through. And that's been kind of interesting too. Is like how do people respond to your own opinions and your own thoughts? Yeah, it's super, it's like a fascinating study in psychology of yourself, which is neat. Yeah.
So, in light of us bouncing, uh, what the hell is the metaverse?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. So it's kind of like the physical digital reality. So everything that exists on the internet right now would be a little bit more tangible. So instead of us being on a Zoom call, like we would essentially be in the same room together, but in the metaverse. So it'd be like VR, AR integrated. So I'd be able to see you, I'd be able to interact with you. It'd be a much more immersive experience than this like very, very two-dimensional call that we're on right now. And it really expands beyond that. Like the way that I like to think about it is that everything that's in your brain could be tangible. So like if you have a bunch, like a really long to-do list, you could sort of have that like up in a wall on the metaverse and be able to like sift through it. And if you wanted to like interact with your friends, you could do that in the metaverse. If you wanted to wear different types of clothing, you could do that in the metaverse. It's very like, it's not the most how do you say, like it's not the most well-formed concept. Like I think everybody, I get asked this question every time I talk to somebody, and I think it's just because it's not like a super well-formed concept yet, because it doesn't quite exist yet. But that's sort of like what it would look like, is everything that we do on the internet we would do in this physical digital reality.
And something that interests me about it is I think that we're not, when we talk about the metaverse, I think we're sometimes not present to the fact that it's like already there
Mhm.
in some ways. And then, there's more options available to us over time.
Mhm.
But, the, you know, the internet kind of went through different phases. Sort of at the beginning, we were sort of towards like blogs and forums, and then we went to AOL Instant Messenger, and then we went to social media networks and things like that. And as I went through that series of things, listeners of different ages felt like sweet nostalgia about one of those. And the one that we felt the sweet nostalgia about, I feel like it was a glimpse into the metaverse. It was a moment where we built a little bit of a world. Like for me, probably AOL Instant Messenger was just like, you know, eight conversations going at once with a bunch of my besties from, a bunch of different states. And I have really good memories from that. And it was it felt like a part of my real life, where I was just
Mhm.
extended out into the internet. And I think Elon Musk makes the point like, oh yeah, we're already a creature that
Yeah.
has an extension, right? The cell phone, right?
Mhm.
Because people are talking about how we could go farther in those realms. I can't think of the word of what that's called, but having a digital arm, for example.
Yeah.
We already have that to some degree with cell phone. And I think the metaverse is already forming. It's already there, and some people probably feel like they're already living in it.
Mhm.
It's not something that is like, ethereal and far away. It's ethereal in its totality, in how it could be as a whole. But it's already started. That's my view. What
Mhm.
does that make you think of?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would agree with you. I think that, like what Elon is working on with Neuralink, like we're like literally a stone's throw away from this sort of stuff. And like anecdotally, this is so I went to New York City for the first time, and I'm only known through my TikToks, but I've gotten recognized like so many times in real life, and everyone's like, wow, you're a real person. Like it's super odd because I've only ever existed to them in like this first iteration of the metaverse. And so I think like we are there, right? Like I don't exist. If the internet crashed tomorrow, like me and you
Yeah.
what are we gonna do? Like, so I
Yeah.
do think that there is sort of like this first like the metaverse is a tadpole, right? I totally agree with you. Yeah. And the phone is an extension of our body, 100%.
Yeah, I started taking off on TikTok right
Yeah.
around the time that they were talking about banning TikTok in the
Mm.
US. And I was like, oh, am I gonna die?
Right. Yeah.
Is my
Yeah.
digital self going to cease existence?
Yeah.
It's really wild how all of this
Yeah.
works.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about like cybersecurity and like
Mm,
if everything just, I mean, obviously, like my content disappearing because of a cybersecurity hack would be the least of the world's worries.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think there would be a lot of other stuff to worry about. But it's just interesting to think about how much of our lives are like being built online and still some of the susceptibility that exists just because of like how the internet is structured. So yeah, it's super if you really start thinking about it, you're like, okay, whoa, yikes. Mhm.
yeah. There's a lot to it. So I haven't talked much about crypto on this
Mhm.
podcast besides Bitcoin.
Mhm.
Could you give just a basic overlay of Ethereum? And then
Absolutely.
mostly I want to focus on, what you're excited about with, the potential of it.
Mhm.
But just a basic overlay of, how, for example, how does Ethereum compare to Bitcoin? Like, because Bitcoin is, I think, a good baseline for people to understand what's going on. But what is Ethereum?
Yeah, so I mean, I think of Bitcoin more as like a digital asset. Like it's not really a currency quite yet, just because it's a little too volatile. So it's sort of like digital gold, like where people would invest in it. It's more of a store of value, whereas Ethereum is more like a computing platform because smart contracts, which are like different contracts that exist between two different people on the blockchain, that's more of Ethereum style. So like different things are built on the back of Ethereum, whereas Bitcoin right now, the way that it's structured, it's more so just like Bitcoin, but Ethereum is hosts a lot of different things, and a lot of different things are built off Ethereum. So I think those are like the two main differences. Is that Ethereum is a little bit more of a computing platform, like it's more of the computer of crypto, and then Bitcoin is more of like the gold of crypto. And that's how I differentiate between the two. I'm personally just a little bit more bullish on Ethereum just because I think there's a lot of applications for it, and it's really like the backbone of a lot of crypto projects that are popping up, and beyond the gas fees, right? Like it is pretty effective. So I think that that is what would give it a lot of value over time.
So what does Ethereum make possible? What sort of things, like what are we, I mean, if we're tying this into the metaverse, how does Ethereum play into this?
Mhm. I mean, like a lot of, excuse me, a lot of stuff like exists on the back of Ethereum. So if you think about like DAOs, if you think about different NFT projects, like those are all going to have some association with Ethereum or something that has a similar computing platform as Ethereum. So it just makes a lot of like the Web3 cryptoverse possible. And so like if you think about sort of the crypto economy at large, everything that you think of beyond Bitcoin to a certain degree is going to exist because of Ethereum. A lot of stuff isn't built on the back of Ethereum, but a lot of stuff is. So if you think about just the different applications, so like if you want to join a DAO, which is just is a decentralized autonomous organization, some of those are built on the back of Ethereum. NFTs, which are non-fungible tokens, so you can think of those like different pieces of artwork, you're going to have access to that on Ethereum's blockchain. So it's just more like an accessibility standpoint. Like I guess the way that I think about it is like it's the ferry. Like you know how you go if you're like in New York City, for example, there's a ferry over to New Jersey. Ethereum's kind of like the ferry that would go in between the cities.
So what excites you about Ethereum? There's so many aspects to it. It's a big world already.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the different applications. Like I think it's the different things that it can do, the infrastructure. So I think that the reason that people are really bullish on the crypto Web3 universe is because of the different things that I think Ethereum and platforms like Ethereum enable. Like crypto Web3 isn't about like having a digital asset that goes up over time. It's about reinventing how we do finance, DeFi. It's about reinventing how you interact as a community through DAOs. It's about reinventing how you think about artwork and sort of the monetization of artwork, which would be through NFTs and a lot of different applications beyond that. So I think that the fact that Ethereum and other applications like it are enabling that, like it's like That's pretty cool, right? So that's why I like it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an entirely new playground.
Yeah.
I think I've already gone through this theory on a podcast before, but uh, my idea is that um, everybody that hits a certain level of success, um, they all eventually do this thing where they go to the wine and cheese parties and the art galleries. Like that's pretty much what every successful person in the past several hundred years has done, is
Hmm.
they go to the wine and cheese parties and the art galleries. And it's like, why? Why is everybody doing that? Well, it's sort of like the understood, accepted place where, you know, some of the successful go. And the people who it's perpetuated by the fact that somebody that's newly successful knows they've learned enough that they know they need to broaden their horizons.
Hmm.
So they're like, okay, I'm going to go out to these particular social events to broaden my horizon, make new connections, make new business opportunities, and, you know, hopefully have some fun. You know, if we've made it, you know, maybe we should have some fun too.
Yeah.
But my theory is that the NFT world is the new wine tasting and art gallery,
Hmm.
because a bunch of the new rich are
Hmm.
going to come from the crypto markets.
Hmm.
And if you have a really large segment of new rich, they're going to all gravitate to whatever's in their comfort zone. And I mean, what's a safer comfort zone than artistic experimentation built on the same technology as what got you successful in the first place? So I think that some of the world's most important social events are going to be connected to the NFT space.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. And I think that so I agree with you. And I think that because crypto is new and Web3 is newer, there's like still this signaling aspect of things, and a lot
Mhm.
of, and I was thinking about this morning, because a lot of these people, like, it was an uphill battle from like 2015 to 2018. Like the market just was not budging, and they sort of sat through, they held on, they've been a part of this for a long time. So I think it makes sense that they would want to like signal wealth, because essentially that's hard-earned wealth. Like everybody was calling them crazy, and they were just holding on. So I think that it makes total sense that they would want to like go to the wine and cheese gallery. And I think that NFTs are really interesting because of the community aspect. So like, oh, I have a Bored Ape, right? So I'm part of the Bored Ape club, and I get to be a part of that, and that's like a huge signal because I get to put it in my Twitter profile picture, and everybody knows that I'm like I've made it in crypto land, because those things are like millions of dollars. So I think there's a lot of that too. It's just how do you signal wealth, and NFTs are a great way to do that. Mhm.
Yeah, how much is status gonna play into the metaverse? How much is
Mhm.
status gonna play into like what we're seeing moving forwards?
I don't know. Like, I'm honestly a little surprised by like how signally things are, at least from the
Mhm.
outside looking in. But also, I exist on Twitter, so I think that everything is sort of amplified there. But I think that there's a lot of um, so, so like the theory that I'm working through right now is we've been a very individualistic society ever since the Industrial Revolution. Like it's been the factory worker, but once we entered like the tech revolution, it became okay, I'm part of a tech company. But now we're like broadening the horizons even more, where it's like, oh, I'm a part of a DAO, I'm part of this NFT community, I'm part of the internet. And so I think that we're still trying to calibrate on how we signal status in like a decentralized world. So I don't know exactly how that's going to manifest yet, because we've never been able to interact on a communal level in this way. So I think it's going to be really interesting I feel like we're kind of returning to like our humanistic roots in a really strange fashion. And I don't know how status would work in that sort of society.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I don't think it ever stops being a factor.
No,
I think it's a
no,
major factor
huge.
in all of this. Um, Let me move my microphone so I feel cooler. All right, so
You
the
look cool.
thank you, thank you. Yeah, so I just had Robert Breedlove on the podcast,
Oh,
which
very
was a
cool.
really interesting podcast. He's, you know, leans very much in the Bitcoin direction. And he finally convinced me to read The Sovereign Individual, which I'd been putting off. I knew it was on my list,
Mm,
but I hadn't read it.
yeah.
And they're talking about the profitability of violence, which is such a fascinating concept. And the idea is like, okay, so several hundred years ago, it's very profitable to be violent while on a horse. So we had these things called knights, right? Um, and you could be profitable as, you know, say a highwayman, but you would never really hear highwayman. You would hear highwaymen, right? It was plural because it was individuals walking. So you needed sort of a slightly larger group to gang up on people, you know, to take down a trader on a road. So you had highwaymen and knights, and that was a lot of your violence in that era. And then we had gunpowder, right? We had the Gunpowder Revolution. Now the profitability of violence changes. It's highly unprofitable to be violent on a horse, like super expensive at that point.
Yeah.
And it's very profitable to amass enough wealth to afford guns and gunpowder, right? And that was the point at which citizenship started to become a thing. So before that point, we had like if a war was being played out, you would see people come to that war with small groups of 3s and 5s and 10s wearing their individual colors, flying their individual flag. Like it was an army of much more than that, but they were all in these little pockets. But at the point that the Gunpowder Revolution happened, that was the point at which things got more unified because it was more profitable. It made more sense to do things on a larger scale because the violence had gone long range. And one of the arguments in the book is that in the realm of cryptocurrency, that changes that again. Because if I send 3 warships towards a country and halfway to the country, that, you know, that country decides to just send its crypto somewhere else, well, now I've just wasted my gas. The profitability of violence sort of starts to shift. And so I'm really just fascinated at how like these seems to shift our behavior on these things seem to shift our behavior on a fundamental level. And I think another one of them might be status. Like I think it might make us a little bit more back to that like smaller group level where it's like, okay, no, we have our group colors again. Because maybe that's the way to survive in a world where status is so like, you know, I can't match, you know, the 5 top football players in status, right? Like me personally, I mean, well, I'm pretty awesome, but you know, like I probably don't want to, you know, spend all of my time trying to, you know, status signal myself against these top 5 football players in the US. But you know, I can signal status in a smaller, more niche way on the internet, because you know we create our value systems around our specific interests on the internet. So I think as the blockchain technology starts to build out in the metaverse, I think it makes those pockets become more and more diverse and more small. What do you think about that theory?
That was a lot of theory. I mean, I
I
feel
know,
like
I know. I kind of went in a lot of places.
It's like, what do you think
But
about the future of the world?
yeah, but the future of the
Yeah.
world, Kyla.
I know. Yeah. What are my thoughts on it? Yeah. I mean, so like that sounds fascinating. I think like, oh my gosh. So like one thing that I was talking to somebody this morning about who their salary is voted on by a community in a DAO, and
Oh, wow.
and I was like, okay, but what happens if the community turns against you? Like
Yeah.
what do you like? I feel like there's this sense of altruism that surrounds the crypto space, which is super important because I think it's super important that we have altruism and that we have people that are like net positive on society. But I also like I'm somewhat of a cynic, so it's like I
Yes.
don't know if everybody out there is like. I think the politics of violence are super important because you have a bunch of hacks. You have a bunch of people who are like, I'm going to hack into the system. It happens like once a month. I'm going to steal a bunch of crypto and I'm going to run away.
Yes.
And I think to your point about like figuring out status and what does it mean to be a part of something. Like another point that they were making or talking about was kind of like, okay, so can everybody, like you and three friends, like create a DAO and like monetize your friendship? So I think there's going to be a really interesting intersection where it's like, how much do we monetize our existence? And you and I know a lot about this, because more or less because we monetize our existence as creators. Like
Yes.
our whole personality is something that is billable, which is like super bizarre, and it might feel really
Agreed.
weird. But in we're not like 9 to 5. Like you have to kill what you eat, essentially.
Yeah.
And so I think that sort of structure applied across society could be really interesting from a status perspective, like you were talking about, because it's like, okay, collectively you might be stronger, but still, how does an individual play into that broader equation? And what if one individual turns away from the group, and like, where do they go? How do you fire somebody? Is that a thing that can happen? So I think there's a lot of interesting components to this like communal society that we're leaning into. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's wild what you said about the employee that had his salary voted on, because one thing that I'm concerned about, and I'm just going to use the words left right because it's convenient.
Mhm.
I think that there's going to be a bunch of experiments in the blockchain world where things lean like unpredictably hard right and
Mhm.
unpredictably hard left
Mhm.
in like such an extreme way that it's like a little miniature metaverse town that like blows itself up with, you know, like I'm gonna be like hardcore socialist to a point that, you know, things just go wild, and then I'm gonna go, you know, just like everything structured, you know, structured anarchy, right? You know,
Mhm.
like where it's like highly logical anarchy, you know,
Mhm.
to a point where it just blows itself up again. I don't know where that would go, but I suspect there's going to be a lot of that sort of like
Yeah.
uh I don't know, natural evolutionary explosions happening.
Yeah. I mean, so I think there's like a lot of catalyst to like regulation still hasn't happened around crypto, and there's a lot of like, oh well, we exist in this country, so we don't need to be regulated by this state entity. So I think that could be interesting in terms of like what works and then what doesn't. But, and this is like not a popular opinion, I think that some element of centralization is needed. Like
Mm,
I don't think that you can have a decentralized governance model just because of, I'm a cynic. I think that's like the main thing. But I think to your point, I just don't know how you could have sort of this like structured, like you said, anarchy, where it's like we are so against any form of centralized leadership. Like what happens if you have to make a really really hard decision? Like does the 2/3 voting model still work? I don't know. So yeah, I don't know. I need to read a lot more, because I'm probably missing some stuff, but that's just something I think about a lot. Is like you do need centralized leadership at some point, I think.
yeah, I have my misgivings about any choice that is absolute.
Yes, makes sense. Yeah, the world exists in a grayscale for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, pretty early on, the lesson was ingrained from my art teacher of there are no
Mhm.
straight lines in nature, and I think that's a fairly accurate, and a lot more than just the basic, you know, art advice there. Um, the let's talk about drama.
Drama?
Yeah, let's go to Evergrande.
Oh, sure. Yeah. The Evergrande is dramatic. There's so much drama happening in the free, man. Like every time I turn around, somebody's like, "Kyla, talk about this. Talk about the debt ceiling. Talk about the U.S. government not being able to make a decision and playing hooky with trillions of dollars." Yeah. So Evergrande is interesting. I've done a couple of research papers on it. I mean, the main thing there is like, so there's this real estate company, this property company in China, and it's very, very over leveraged. So it's taken on a ton of debt. It has $300 billion in liabilities, and about 88 billion of that is debt. And a lot of that debt is going to come due in the next 2 years. But the issue with China and just China, like this is just an objective fact, just not anything against China, but they have a lot of ghost real estate. So they've built out a lot of real estate that nobody's living in. And so if you don't have people living in your buildings, you're not getting paid. And so Evergrande is not getting paid, but in order to keep on making money, they have to keep on building, right? So they're kind of in this really terrible situation where they have a bunch of different projects. Like they have Evergrande Fairyland, which is sort of like Disney World. They have a water bottle company. They have like a wealth management company for their employees. And they also have these properties which are not selling because of the ghost real estate issue in China, the overdevelopedness. And now they're super underwater. And the worry is that if Evergrande implodes, so they don't pay back their debt, they go bankrupt, how will that impact the rest of the property sector? And if the property sector in China implodes, how will that impact all the other things down the supply chain? So the builders, the materials, everything else, the employees, because they employ 123,000 people, just Evergrande alone. And also who holds this debt? Like how many American US companies, US funds hold this debt? How many companies in China hold this debt? And if Evergrande goes under, how are they impacted? So it's kind of like a ticking time bomb of sorts. Yeah.
Is there a US parallel that we could talk about?
The debt ceiling. I mean, that's been like so the U.S. debt ceiling. So every few years the U.S. has to vote on like how they're essentially like how they're going to pay stuff, and they have already taken out all this debt because of COVID. So they already have all the debt. It's just like, oh, are we going to like pay it or not? And so what's happening right now in Congress is they're like, oh well, so Republicans is just objective. It's not me picking party sides, but Republicans are like, well, we don't want to help the Democrats who are in control right now. We don't want to help the Democrats pay off the debt ceiling or figure out how to pay it because that's going to make Biden look good, and we don't want that. So there's a lot of like pointing fingers about the debt ceiling, and if they don't figure out a plan and the U.S. defaults on its debt, that could be an Evergrande situation, right? So I think that that's a very broad example, and then like narrowing it down to a single company. I mean, so what happened with COVID, like March of 2020, the Fed stepped in, the Federal Reserve, who kind of they're supposed to manage the economy, but they end up managing the stock market. They control interest rates, and they help with monetary policy, or they run monetary policy. And so what they did is they bought a lot of bonds. So they bought a lot of debt from companies like Boeing, and to help support the stock market when it was crashing during March of 2020, during that peak of COVID. And so now there's a lot of ghost companies, so ghost real estate, right, in China, but ghost companies here in the US that are essentially backstopped by the Fed, because the Fed went up and bought all their debt, and they're like, oh, don't worry, we got you if things go bad. And so now there's that really interesting dynamic where it's like, well, can the stock market go down? Because the Fed's always going to step in. But then the question now is sort of with Evergrande is like, will they step in? Will the Fed step in? And with Evergrande, it's will the Chinese government step in and save them?
Oh, that sounds very scary.
Oh no, it's so like, yeah. I don't know. I'm a researcher, so I tend to like think of everything as sort of like a little bug on a petri dish.
Yes.
And I was talking to somebody this weekend and doing the whole like blah blah debt, blah blah implosion, and they were like, aren't you worried? And I was like, yeah, I mean, I am, but I think that there's this, I mean, I think that I grew up during the great financial crisis. So I've only ever seen a bull market. So there's a really strange, like psychological thing that I have to work through, where it's like, I've never really seen a down market. So I think that there is a high possibility of a down market, but a lot of people have never seen one. So that's like another worry too, is what does that look like? And how do you respond? Yeah. So yes, it is scary.
Yeah. And then also like, this isn't the first time everything could blow up, right?
No, I mean, 2008, yeah, the market blows up every 10 years. Like that's usually the cycle.
Yeah.
I think now the worry is that if it blows up, what will happen? Because like that was, so what happened in 2008 is there was a lot of structured products that were all bundled together, like bad debt, good debt, everything imploded. The real estate market imploded. Something really similar could happen now because I mean, everything is hot. The real estate market is hot. The stock market is hot. And the craziest thing is the stock market will not respond. Like we lost a war in Afghanistan and the stock market kept on going up. And so I think that's like the really concerning thing. And if you really like want to double click into it, you can sort of look at passive flows. So like passive money is like people throwing their money into a 401k, which you're supposed to do. You throw your money into a 401k with Vanguard, BlackRock, Fidelity, whatever. But you are a buyer at every price point. You don't say, oh, Vanguard, don't buy Boeing or don't buy Apple if it's like, you know, $400. You're going to keep on buying because that's what a 401k does, is it buys. And so you have a lot of passive money that's going to buy at every point along the stock market. And the question is like, as passive flows keep on moving the market up, as the market gets beta to flow, right? Instead of beta to earnings, or like beta. So beta meaning that moves alongside. So the market is somewhat driven by just these inflows from retirement accounts. And people just passively investing their money with Vanguard, whatever. If those people decide, whoa, I'm afraid, and they start pulling their money out of the market, how does that work? Because it's just like, it's really crazy to think about. If flows stop happening into the market, that could be really bad too. And but I think that's like a big risk as well, is like you have a lot of passivity in the market and you have buyers at every price point. And what does that mean for actual price discovery, you know?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by this like simultaneous everything's a disaster, everything keeps functioning thing that like plays out all the time in history. Like it's all over the place. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about, even with like, okay, do we completely decentralize or do we need some centralization? Because there's been people talking about how, like, you know, governments are going to make everything crash for ages. And then there's been people calling for absolute governments for ages. And yet people seem to keep ticking either way. And then like, I don't know, I was really interested when I heard apparently like there was almost no starvation during the Great Depression. Like almost zero. So I don't know, like I don't know how to get like a full picture on it. I mean, I don't know that it's possible, but I like your approach of bug in the petri dish, because I think that some people get to a point where they're like, oh yeah, disaster is nigh, and you know, there's no fixing it, and here it comes. And I grew up in a very conservative church, and I've known a lot of people in conservative churches, and I've seen many times the whole, you know, he is coming and everything is gonna change then, in that moment when he comes, sort of a religion. And I've noticed that a lot of the way people think about finances is very similar to religion, where it's like, you know, we're coming to this point where, you know, the great creator is going to land whenever that is. And usually for people that think this way, it's crash oriented. You know, the rapture is the crash. And I don't know that that's sometimes that's, I think, a dangerous way of looking at it. Because I mean, we know that a common expression among investors themselves is it's in your best interest to be an optimist, right? So it's just a weird one. It's do you find yourself fundamentally optimistic in the market or pessimistic?
I mean, I'm optimistic long term, and I think this is something I've really been working on. It's like I just read, and I synthesize, and I tell my audience what's up. I try not to like pass on a ton of opinion. I think in the long run, the market goes up 53% of the time. So I imagine things are okay 53% of the time. But I do think that there's sort of this like mindset that right now, like the market has to go down, the market must go down. And if it doesn't go down, it's going to go down soon. And it's going to be even worse because it hasn't gone down yet. So I think for me, like I'm fundamentally optimist because I think companies are going to keep on growing. Like Apple's going to keep on releasing new iPhones. Somebody tweeted out a chart today that showed like the top companies over the past 100 years. And, you know, all the way back in like 18, whatever, it was like Shell, well, maybe the early 1900s, it was like Shell, GE, like all of these companies that aren't as big anymore. And now it's like Apple, Microsoft, et cetera. And I think you would have to be so bearish on human nature and innovation and technology to not think that the companies are going to keep on growing, keep on innovating, that people are going to keep on growing, keep on innovating. So I think fundamentally, yes, an optimist, but also am worried about how we approach the market from a societal perspective. I think Americans have a big issue with gambling and drinking. And I that shows up in the stock market for sure.
I agree. I think that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, I'm fundamentally bullish on humans.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they're great.
They're awesome, most of the time.
Yeah. I mean, 50, what was it? 53% of the time?
53%,
They're great.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah, let's go on with some of these points that I have in my notes. So I have some more drama that I'd love to ask you about.
Let's
You
do
up
it.
for more drama?
Let's
Okay.
gossip, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Let's hear about Solano.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Oh, okay.
Real drama here. So, can you just give like a really like overview of maybe Solana in comparison to Ethereum so we can just connect the dots and what that is and then what happened there?
Yeah, it's like a faster Ethereum. It's like a more scalable Ethereum. It's pretty cool. The issue was that so everything that Ethereum does, it essentially can do to a certain degree, just a faster version of it. The problem there was that it shut down for like a whole day, and that's not good. And the other interesting thing about Solana is they have a CEO, and that's very, very like, oh, what? Like, because that's centralized, right? Like that's centralized leadership, and that's not what crypto is all about. And everyone, it was kind of funny, like everyone, Packy McCormick wrote a piece that was bullish on Solana, and I had been watching it for a little bit, and I was like, oh, his piece is, a lot of people are going to start buying it because of that. And they did, and the coin went up, and then all of a sudden, you know, the platform stops working, and that's not great. Like nobody wants that to happen, especially in crypto. Yeah.
It goes to your point of like finding that balance of centralization and decentralization, because I think you may be right. Like I don't know that there's any time in history where people haven't eventually like shouted out, we want a king. Like people seem to want some level of centralization, and then you get too much and man, the risk gets really high really fast. Okay, we talked briefly in the previous conversation, post us doing the introvert thing of sleeping on our
laying on the ground,
respective floors before an interview.
Love that.
Yes. Oh man, it's so valuable. Like for anybody
valuable.
listening, never hesitate to sleep on floors between meetings, especially Zoom meetings, because I think Zoom exhaustion is real.
It's so bad. Yeah, it's so bad. I've had a ton of like IRL meetings this week, not nearly as exhausted after those, which is surprising, but very tired after Zoom.
I agree completely.
It's weird. Super odd.
Anyway, I have literally like two single word notes for the next things, which is uranium and semiconductors.
Oh, nice. Okay. Sweet.
So I just leave it open.
Yeah, uranium is my next piece. There's like a uranium Twitter, and they've been all up in my DMs like, Kyla, write about uranium. And so I'm like, all right. They send me research, which is really helpful. It's like a little mode of decentralized research for me, which is cool. But yeah, still working on the thesis around that. Like it sort of ties into supply chains at large, which are super interesting to watch right now. They keep on breaking down. And so uranium is interesting from a nuclear energy perspective because the UN released that energy document a few weeks ago where it was like, oh, the world's going to explode and by 2030 if we don't get it together. So uranium is a really good and your nuclear energy is potentially a really good way to kind of get off fossil fuels for once. And there's also this Sprott Physical Uranium Trust, which has just bought up a ton of uranium on the thesis of like supply chains whacking out, and then also on the thesis that nuclear energy will soon be adopted, which is pretty cool. I don't know if this might not be exactly right, but I think so. One uranium pellet, which is like about the size of a gummy bear, is as effective as like three like big cans of gasoline. So there's a lot of power packed into it, but it still has to be harnessed in the right way.
Yeah, I'm amazed. I mean, given the opportunity, I will rant on nuclear power because
Yeah, me too.
like I've so far as I know, like I heard we fixed it. Like Bill Gates was like, "Hey guys, we fixed it. Do you want some?" And everybody was like, "No, it's scary."
Yeah,
And
that's
that's really bothersome.
well, yeah, and like if you go to any of the tweets that are like nuclear energy is good, like there's a creator named Isabel. I don't remember her handle, but she makes like good TikToks about uranium. And in her comments, they're like, oh no, we'll explode and turn green if we use uranium. And it's like, you don't think we'll explode and turn green if we keep on like pumping oil out of the ground? Like, oh my
Yeah,
God.
fair enough.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
also, like, I'm pretty sure, like, there was a gap in nuclear power plant development, I believe, post the terrible things that happened of the meltdowns. And then we had the invention of this funny little device called a computer. And we didn't like it's fairly recent, I think, for people to be developing nuclear power plants on something like AutoCAD.
Yeah.
And it's like
Yeah.
some of those nuclear power plants, had to be developed with paper and pencil.
Mhm.
It's like we're dealing with, you know, molecules that, that are many, it's many times smaller than the graphite in a pencil, right? And like I think it's pretty reasonable that we could have created something safer uh, since the time that we had those meltdowns.
Yeah.
And people are really scared of it, which, I mean, fair, but
Fair.
also we have computers now.
And if you just think about like the evolution of the iPhone, right? Like
Yes.
how could you not think that we would people are so smart, like engineers are so good and they specialize in this stuff. Like we've taken the iPhone from like this thing, like a big thing, all the way down to a little thing and then a big thing again, right? And so like the idea that we wouldn't be able to work with uranium and nuclear energy in the same way is a little silly. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know a lot about nuclear power plant development, but I would assume that it would take a similar path of iteration and then probably devices that are smaller and smaller,
Mhm.
right? Like most things that we get really good at, we tend to make them modular and
Mhm.
then like innovate on a really tiny level and then learn how to put as many of those in place as we can. I imagine some version of that would be happening in the nuclear area where like the meltdown now happens on a modular level where you have a tiny device that's having a meltdown that has failsafe on top of failsafe. And yeah, I wish there was more public exploration of nuclear energy.
I think to make like a bad analogy, I think it's kind of like the stock market. Everybody's afraid of it and nobody like really wants to do more research on it. So it ends up being this like very sensationalized thing where people are afraid of it. So they just won't touch it at all. So I think that's what what happens. And then to your point about semiconductors, like the technology for semiconductors, like the stuff that they can do now versus what they used to have to do, it's like insane. And so similar with nuclear as well. Yeah.
So I'd like to shift now from the wonderful market things to the wonderful creator things.
Yeah.
So tell me about like just in general, like what's it been like with your experience, like becoming a creator? And just your broad thoughts, and I just want to explore this a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it's been amazing. Like the fact that I
Yeah.
get to make content, and I quit my full-time job 2 weeks ago, so I'm still hacking away at the full-time thing, but
Hmm.
uh, I kind of like stumbled into it on accident and had left my job in asset management. Had sort of like my tech job was kind of like an in-between job where I was like, what's going on? So I just did that and then started making TikToks. Still relatively small on TikTok. Don't have a ton of followers, but I have a pretty engaged audience. And then on Twitter, I have a really engaged audience on there. It's just been, I think there's so many components to it. Like monetization is a beast that needs to be tamed for sure. But the fact that you're able to make content that inspires and like helps people is just such a gift. So I would not want to do anything else, but there's so much to it that needs to be solved and needs to be figured out still from just a market calibration perspective. But it's super fun on the aggregate. Yeah.
What are some of the problems that need to be solved?
So I think like monetization is hard. So we're both TikTokers and
Yes.
I'm not in the TikTok creator fund, but I don't think it pays the bills from what I've heard.
Oh, I'm making bank with that. Like,
Oh,
yeah.
no
Oh wait,
way.
no, I'm not supposed to say how much I make.
Oh,
I think I can get away with saying it's single digits a day.
oh my God.
Yeah, it's very small. It's very small.
So so like there's a couple of different ways that you can monetize as a creator. You can monetize from a platform, you can monetize from your audience, and you can monetize from a brand. And so YouTube does, I think, a really great job if you're a big account to monetize from YouTube. Like you can usually
Yes.
get away with that. TikTok, no. Twitter, absolutely not. And then it's like, okay, well, can I monetize for my audience? Like, can I develop a Patreon? But for me, and I think a lot of other creators, it's like, well, I want to, keep a lot of content free, and especially me as a financial content creator, I don't want to gatekeep anything from anybody. So it's like, okay, well, I can't really monetize for my audience. So it's like, okay, well, I got to monetize with brands, but that ends up being like kind of a weird situation because it's like, what is the right brand to work with? Who do you listen to? What is your purpose and sort of interfacing with that brand? Like driving users to a platform is great to a certain degree, but there's also like this inelasticity of demand, right? So like how many users can you drive to different platforms? How many creators can they use to sort of get this point across, like until that curve flatlines? Yeah.
Have you looked at all into equity for creators? Have you
Yeah.
explored that either in thought or study?
So that's like weird from a taxation perspective and also
Yeah.
from a ownership perspective. I think that that's a super awesome way that creators can sort of get more skin in the game with the companies that they work with. But that can't come until you've sort of solved one of the other three arms, I think. Yeah. So it's definitely a way, but it's a little sticky. And one thing that I've found with some brands is the terms of the contracts are a little funny. So you've really got to read. And I don't think a lot of creators have a background in legalese, but the brands do. And
Yeah.
so you have to be super, super careful. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting, like the the initial income challenges are super hard.
Mm-hmm.
Like once a creator is, you know, getting past a certain income level, they can start experimenting, they can
Mm-hmm.
start grabbing equity, they can start doing some of these other, fun experiments.
Mm-hmm.
But the initial start seems to be quite difficult for most creators that
Mm-hmm.
I've been seeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky because I'm a finance content creator. So there's a lot of brands and platforms that are trying to get finance people, and that's a hard market to tap into. Like those the customer acquisition cost on somebody to onboard to one of those platforms is huge for the brands. So the more creators that they can leverage in that process, like the better for them. But I think like for science creators or for creators who specialize in something different than that, like that can be really tough. So I think that there's not a great solution right now for that. Mm-hmm.
Any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of people that are trying to solve it. So there's like Stand With Me, which is a company by John Hugh, I think his name is. Like
Yes.
they have it where it's sort of audience interfacing, where audiences can pay for like a personalized video, something like that. So I think those sorts of models could be interesting. But I just, like ideally the monetization would come from the platforms, right? So like you would own the content and the platform would pay you to make content. Everybody does this out of like the kindness of their hearts right now. So I think that the platforms have a bigger role to play. I would love to see less audience reliance and a little bit less brand reliance too, because that's sort of a funny model if you think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like the platforms, like social media platforms in general, seem to receive payment in cash from businesses for advertising revenue,
Mhm.
and then pay out in status to creators. That seems to be their model at the moment.
I like that. That's a really good way to describe it. Yeah.
And
How do you?
I mean, it works. Like you can make humans do that.
Humans love status. Yeah, status
Yeah,
monkeys. Yeah.
yeah. But also, I think that like if a platform were willing to go the route of paying out in both status and cash in a significant way, I mean, even YouTube, like YouTube is kind of the king, right? YouTube has won more than any, and they're one of the ones that pays out the most.
Half of all their money. Yeah, half of all their revenue.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's like it must work. It must work to pay out to creators. And I mean, TikTok's making an absurd amount of money. It's astonishing.
Billion users.
Yeah.
It's insane. And
And yeah, go ahead.
I don't know who sees the money because it's not the creators. So
Yeah, I mean they're paying out a much smaller percentage than YouTube. And I think for now it works. But these companies aren't too big to fail. They're like there's still competitors to these companies. And I think that a company that can manage to do TikTok as well as TikTok, I mean, which is saying a lot because TikTok's an amazing platform.
very good.
But if a company can manage to do it and slide more of that revenue across the table to creators, I think they'd win.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, I think that it's just tough because you have a lot of companies that are like, oh, we're going to be the next TikTok. We're going to do it.
Yeah.
How do you get users? How do you get all the people that are on TikTok over to your new platform? And that's like the hardest part is getting the audience to move.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I totally agree. I think that we're going to reach some sort of inflection point because this is an unsustainable model right now. We're going to reach some sort of inflection point, I hope, where either TikTok or another platform is like, oh, actually, maybe we should provide a living wage to people who are dedicating their lives to this and sort of valuing them as such. So, I mean, and then there's also like, could you develop your own token and sort of like, do creators need to trade as companies? Do they need to trade as founders? Like, is there sort of a VC style model where, you know, investors can invest in creators and they get funded that way? There's a lot of different avenues that I think could happen, but yeah, the market just has to calibrate right now.
Yeah, I mean, I would think if TikTok is smart, which they obviously are,
They're very smart. Yeah.
they would wait as long as they could
Mm-hmm.
using the model that they're currently using, and then as soon as an upstart offers a better model, all of a sudden start paying out.
Yeah.
which, I mean, I don't see a reason why they wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Um,
You see
yeah.
it with Twitter a little bit right now. So Twitter started
Mm.
trying, they're trying to do like super follows and tipping on tweets because it's like, well, I could just go somewhere else. So I think that a lot of the companies are going to start incorporating this idea of monetization of your content more, which will be good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like TikTok is doing like GIFs underneath the comments. Like that's one way that they've sort of innovated. Yeah.
Yes, they are moving towards monetization. I think that TikTok in particular is something that people are still just wildly
Oh,
underestimating.
oh my God, 100%. Especially in the industry like finance, they don't get it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a platform that is as big as it is, and they haven't even started most of their like say, retail integrations yet. Like that hasn't even begun, where they have a bunch of retail integrations. I think they're doing it in China and breaking all sorts of revenue records doing that. So it's like it's just a matter of time.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that like I coach folks, and some of my clients are creators, and some of them are concerned. They're like, oh well, it's great that I'm big on TikTok, but not super high profitability. I'm like, I would keep creating. I would stay on TikTok.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
like branch out for sure if you want to. Like I'm branching out. I want to branch out because there's, you know, not everything I have to say is encompassed in 1 minute. But I think that the potential for what's going to happen in the future on TikTok is amazing.
Yeah. I mean, do you know Nasdaq? Um, he's like a space creator.
I
Um,
know of him. I know of
yeah.
him. Yeah.
So his whole thing is like, why do we have a hidden like button instead of like a merch button on our pages? Like, there's so much that TikTok could do with the
Hmm.
profile itself. So yeah, definitely really excited about that. And yeah, I think everybody should try and create content and keep on like keep the course. This stuff will figure itself out. And yeah, and definitely like try to what I do, and this is sometimes like not the best according to some, is I try to hit everything. So I do YouTube, I do Instagram, I do Twitter, I do TikTok, because I figure I'll hit somebody who didn't see it before at one of those points. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm all for building out for sure. I'm
Mm-hmm.
I'm I'm definitely trying to expand myself. So in the midst of this, I think this is a good time to ask one of my last questions that I have,
Sure.
which is how does the creator economy relate to the Cambrian explosion?
Oh, yeah, that was one of my pieces. I think that we're kind of at this like where everything's still an amoeba and everyone's like, oh, what's going on? I do think that we're going to have sort of this moment where we become everything hits at the inflection point more or less, and we start really seeing a lot of innovation. We start seeing a lot of these. I think there's a lot of baggage around the crypto economy right now, so that doesn't really relate to thesis of the Cambrian explosion, but there's a lot of companies building for creators that like don't talk to creators, but they're getting a ton of VC money. And so I would love a world, and I think if this Cambrian explosion thesis plays out, where that VC money that's going towards companies that are like, let me help, you monetize your Instagram story, all that money goes back into creators who know what they're doing best. And so I think that could be like the sort of like this momentum factor, is how do you get the creators on this path towards the future. Yeah.
So in conclusion, we're just getting started.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. I think that this is like TikTok for first gen. I think this is first generation TikTok. I think
Yeah.
that we'll look back on this and be like, what? We won't even know. It won't even, it'll be unfathomable the way that they monetize and the way that the economy operates, I think. And it'll be so much smoother and so different, I hope. So yeah, this is just the beginning.
Yeah, I'm amazed at I mean, I've loved sci-fi books for a while,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's just the amount of possibilities are jaw-dropping.
Hmm.
I think about like I remember riding in a car with my friend and him being like, "Yeah, I mean, electric cars are cool, but they're never going to be mainstream." And that was 4 years ago. And now the basic assumption is like, well, yeah, obviously, pretty soon anything else is going to be obsolete. It's just the way it is. And that's happening with all sorts of tech. And then the other element is the diversity, where like on one hand, these things that we could never have imagined are becoming possible, like every day. But then on the other hand, a number of variants on something is going way farther than we would expect. Like I can't like I sometimes think about like, okay, what's it look like in 100 years? What's it look like in 200 years? It's like, yes, we have the galactic standard language, but it's like, you know, we have many more languages than we do now. We have many more you know, business structures, many more platforms, many more styles of art, because, you know, people are in constant search of variety. And I think as long as the, you know, as long as we can maintain stable society, you know, in terms of, you know, keeping ourselves functional, we'll always seek more interesting creative outlets.
Especially as we reach stability in our lifestyles. So like the less people who are impoverished, the more that we're going to be able to explore different modes of art, different modes of communication. And that'll be really neat. I think it'll be like a renaissance. And I'm really excited for that moment where everybody feels stable enough. Well, not everybody, but most people feel stable enough as to where they can really start like thinking critically about the world around them. And that's when you get that Cambrianist vision. Yeah, totally.
I completely agree. I think we are moving towards a time of more opportunity and more fascination. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate you for coming on.
Of course, yeah. Thank you for having me. This has been a blast.
Is there any place you'd like to send folks online?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at Kyla Scan. Feel free to send me a message. I might take 2 to 5 business days to reply, but I'll try my best. And I'm on TikTok at Kai.now, and I have a Substack, Kyla.substack.com.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.